Have you ever seen somebody and in your head made all these assumptions about who they are, or what they look like, or where they come from, and why do they do what they do? Um, or have you ever been on the other side, that somebody has seen you and they've seen you with this look, and they already assuming everything about you just by the way you look, or the way you dress, or where you're standing, or where you're sitting? It's interesting because sometimes we forget that this human dynamics are part of the story of the Bible. We sometimes kind of disengage from the reality. We read the story and we forget that these were actual people who had these kinds of interactions, and maybe even some prejudice. And because of those prejudice, they responded the way that they did. So today we're going to read a story about somebody who had the shock of their life, because they had an assumption. And they were quite upfront about it and quite honest about it. It's one of those conversations that when you read it at first hand, it seems pretty irrelevant. But when you start paying attention to the details, it starts showing you what God is really trying to say. It's before the conversation we heard with Nicodemus. We're going to go to John chapter 1. And at the end of John chapter 1, we have this interaction that Jesus has with this man. And we'll just be mind blown by the story. So let me read John chapter 1 from verse 43. The next day, Jesus decided to go to Galilee. He found Philip and said to him, "Follow me." Now Philip was from Bethsaida. By the way, that means the house of fish. The city of Andrew and Peter. Philip found Nathanael and said to him, "We have found him, the one whom Moses in the law and also the prophets wrote about, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." Nathanael said to him, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" Philip said to him, "Come and see." Jesus saw Nathanael coming toward him and said to him, "Behold, an Israelite indeed, in whom there is no deceit." Nathanael said to him, "How do you know me?" Jesus answered him, "Before Philip called you, when you were under the fig tree, I saw you." Nathanael answered him, "Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel." Jesus answered him, "Because I told you I saw you under a fig tree, do you believe? You will see greater things than these." And he said to him, "Truly, truly I say to you, you will see heaven opened and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man." What an interesting conversation. We've been looking about conversations with Jesus that will rewire our minds and will challenge us in ways that we've never thought before. And this is definitely one of them. This is one of those conversations that's going to challenge our prejudice, and it's going to challenge our worldview in so many ways. And I don't know if you notice, if we take the story little bit by little bit, Jesus meets this man named Philip, and Philip decides to follow him. And for some reason, Philip seems to understand that there's something special about Jesus. He even says that he's the one that Moses and the prophets talked about. Whatever he understood about that, I don't know. Maybe he thought that Jesus was going to free them from the Romans. Who knows? He gets to Nathanael and he tells him, "Hey, we've found him. Jesus from Nazareth." And Nathanael's response is like, "Can anything good come from Nazareth?" Can you hear the despondence in his voice and his assumption that, man, what are you talking about? How can somebody from Nazareth be the one we're looking for? There's obviously an assumption and a thought and a perspective that Nathanael has. And when you read the story, you're like, what in the world is happening? But if you learn a little bit about Nathanael, which by the way, his name means God has given, Nathanael, God has given us something. He is from this town nearby to Nazareth, kind of on the other side of the valley called Cana. Do you remember that story about the wine and the water being turned into wine and happening at Cana and all this kinds of stuff? That's exactly where Nathanael comes from. And on the other side of the valley, you have the city or the little town of Nazareth. And if you know anything about Nazareth at that time, Nazareth doesn't have a good reputation. Nazareth is where a lot of crime happens and a lot of poor people live. And it's just not really the place where you expect anything good to come out of there. And Canaanites kind of look down on Nazarites because it's just not up to their level and up to their class. So, of course, Nathaniel has his doubts, but also Nathaniel's kind of like assumptions and maybe even prejudice are exposed. So, Philip's answer is, instead of arguing with him, it's like, come and see for yourself. Let's experience it. Could it be? Could it not be? Maybe it's not. But why don't we just experience it? So Nathaniel gives it a shot. And then on the way to talking to Jesus, Jesus makes an incredible statement that for Nathaniel is going to engage him in a way that we would have never noticed. He calls him a true Israelite, an Israelite indeed, that there's no deceit. I mean, if you know that there's a group of people on kind of the other side of the argument, and you know that you're not going to get well with this group of people, and you know that this group of people or this person itself is making assumptions about you and about what you believe or the way that you go about things, would your first inclination be to compliment this person? And not just to compliment them like a fake compliment, but an honest compliment. Would that be what you do? And it's not like Jesus doesn't know what's going on. We read earlier days that Jesus knows what's going on inside of man. So he knows what's happening in Nathaniel. He knows that Nathaniel probably has some prejudice and assumptions about who he is. But instead of allowing that prejudice to dictate the way he's going to interact with him, he reminds him of who he is. And he's like, man, you're really one of those guys that wants Israel to be restored. You are a true Israelite. You want what God has always been asking for the true people of God to stand up. And that breaks all of the walls down that Nathaniel could have had. And he's just vulnerably asking, how do you know that? How could you possibly know that about me? Maybe it is true that that's about Nathaniel, but he's so surprised about how he knows that. And then Jesus responds to this super weird thing about sitting under a fig tree. I mean, did he really see Nathaniel sitting under the tree? Or did he just kind of know it because Jesus is God? I don't know. But the response seems to have mattered a lot. It matters so much that Nathaniel's assumption of can anything good turns into you're the king, you're the guy we've been waiting for. And it's so interesting because if we know anything about the Old Testament, we understand that fig trees and vineyards are a symbol and emblem of prosperity and peace, of that time of restoration when God is going to just kind of give everybody the restoration and peace that they were looking for. We remember that the Jews thought of themselves as exiles in their own land. So they wanted that restoration, not of the place where they lived, but they wanted a restoration of their souls and their lives and everything around that. Yes, they wanted a physical restoration, but that restoration meant so much to them. And the picture of a restored land, if you read the books of Isaiah, for example, is that every single person is chilling under their own fig tree, under their own vineyard, that everybody has shade and prosperity and peace. So Jesus is having a very Jewish conversation with Nathaniel saying, you are a true Israelite because you're waiting for the restoration. And I can see that. I can see that in your heart, even though Nathaniel, you might have some assumptions and some prejudices and some things that are not accurate, that are just shaped because of your culture and your circumstances. I can see beyond that. I can see what's really in your heart, and I'm here to bring that to you. And I don't know if Nathaniel understood 100% what was going on when he said, Rabbi, you're the Son of God, you are the King of Israel. Or if he just thought of himself saying, well, maybe this guy wants the restoration that I also want, so maybe he will help us get there. And for most of the Jews, or several of the Jews, what that meant was rebellion against Rome, and they were just looking for a leader who would take up a sword and fight against Rome, and then they would get their restoration. And I don't know if that's what's going on in Nathaniel's mind. I could assume so, but I'm not necessarily sure. All we know is that he makes this statement and his assumptions of Jesus change. From, can anything good, to this man might be it, or he really is it. But Jesus' response again shows us that he's not there to be validated by men. He actually wants to get to the heart of men. And here's where the conversation reaches its climax. He tells him, I just told you one statement and you believe in me? You will see even better things than this. You will see the angels coming from heaven up and down, and the Son of Man descending upon him. And this picture that he gives you is not an isolated picture. There's a very relevant picture, because if we know our Bibles the way that these guys knew their Bibles, the picture would immediately bring you to the story of this man named Jacob. Jacob, who was running from his brother because he had tricked his brother and he had made a lot of different shady deals, and all of a sudden his brother is confronting him, and on his way to see his brother and kind of realize who knows how his brother is going to answer to all of these tricks, he finds himself in this place where he has a dream, and in his dream he sees almost like a ladder, and what people seem to say is like there's like this mountain and there's like temple on top of the mountain, and this like clear path, this ladder up to this place, and angels coming up and down, and he sees this incredible dream, and he calls that place Bethel, the house of God. And in that moment, what the story of the Bible is trying to point you to is that heaven and earth are overlapping, even if it's in that dream, even if it's for that second, that heaven and earth are coming together. And Jacob got a taste of that. And that happens over and over again in the story of the Bible. You see the tabernacle or the temple, that cloud of the glory of God coming into the temple. It's just, for the Jews, all of those meanings were heaven and earth overlapping as one, just like they were in the garden. So when Jesus talks to Nathanael, he's telling him, hey man, you have not seen anything yet. You will see heaven and earth overlapping again. And they will overlap in the Son of Man. He's making a reference about himself. He's telling him, where heaven and earth come together again, it's in me. And that is where the conversation reaches its climax. That's where it stops. And this is the interesting lesson for you and I. Because sometimes we think that in order to experience the presence of God and experience that beautiful giftedness and that beautiful moment and that joy and all of that, we need to set the mood or listen to the right song or catch the right feeling or understand the right theology. But that has nothing to do with it. Heaven and earth meet in Jesus. And when Jesus is in relationship with us, or we're in relationship with Jesus, we experience the presence of God. We experience heaven and earth coming together once again. We experience what Jesus would later define as eternal life, because knowing Christ is where heaven and earth overlap, and we enter that reality when we get to know him. So whatever assumptions or prejudices we might have about how all of this works are redefined in just this one conversation that Jesus is trying to have with us, letting us know that we want to experience the divine, the presence, the beautiful. It's not all of these things that we always kind of box God into. It's all in him and in the relationship with him. And it can look in many different ways. I'm not saying it doesn't look like those ways, but I'm saying if we're only looking to find God in that specific box that we've always put him in, we might be missing the point. Because it's not about the box. It's not about the pattern. It's not about the formula. It's not about 2 prayers in the morning, 15 minutes in the Bible, 3 worship songs, and then boom, you get it. It's about the relationship you have with this dynamic, living being who wants to relate to you, who tells you and I, like he told Nathanael, do you believe in me? If you do, you will see heaven and earth come together in himself. So the challenge for us today is whatever assumptions we might have, whatever kind of box sometimes we put God into, let him take you outside of the box for a little bit. Let him show you that, man, his divine presence is right there if you want to grab a hold of it. Tonight, I got to do something incredibly different but fun for me. One of my sisters encouraged me to paint what I saw Genesis 1 being all about. And I had one of the most deepest moments that I've had throughout the last few weeks. I had a moment with God as I was painting, because I was talking to him and he was talking to me, just as I was trying to paint what I think Genesis 1 would have looked like. And my painting was horrible. I'm not an artist. I don't paint well. I don't have any artist talent in me. But what I did have was a moment with the divine. A moment where heaven and earth overlapped for me, and where I got to experience Jesus, and even in that little bit of painting. Whatever that looked like for you, I don't know. But don't assume and box Jesus and think just because he's from there, or he doesn't do this, or he doesn't look that way, but rather encounter Jesus in the pages of this book and see him for who he really is, and learn about his compassion and humility and his incredible power and majesty, and his glory and his lordship and his love and his care, and how tender and how big and how he deserves to be feared, but he's also so gentle. Whatever it is for you and whatever it looks like, heaven and earth are right there waiting for us to experience it if we just allow Jesus and us to meet with him. Eternal life is right there for us to grab a hold of. And we just have to get to know him better. I don't know what Nathaniel thought after that statement, but what I do know is that for the next 3 years, he would see and experience exactly what Jesus would have said at that moment. So you and I don't know what you're thinking right now and how you're taking this, and if this is making even a little bit of sense to you. But if it is, will you grab a hold of it? And maybe your life might be different because of the experience that you have with Jesus himself. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, this life, this opportunity that Jesus is offering to us is right there in him. And like Philip told Nathaniel, it's there for us to experience it. Do you want to know what this eternal life looks like and feels like and sounds like and is like, what the experience it is? Here it is. Come and see.